Good people in Washington, D.C. this weekend. Probably because most of them were not from D.C. But I met a lot of good senators and congressmen from both sides of the aisle, believe it or not. And I will tell you that they have changed. It is different. I believe that we are in some sort of an end game. Whether that game lasts another 4 or 5 or 10 years, I don't know. But it's the system as it is not going to last. And everybody in Washington now knows it. It is different. When I was the kook just 5 years ago going to Washington and talking to people, now people came to me and they were the kook in comparison. But not everybody was a Washington insider, and that kind of made the day bearable. One gentleman who owns a small business was standing there. We were picking up garbage, and he said, "Do you know anything about the Jay Treaty?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "You should look into it because it's what's happening right now." So we did. I want to tell you the story because he's right. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. President George Washington sent him to negotiate a treaty with the British. It was in the mid-1790s, and there were still several conflicts between America and Britain, and we were again on the verge of war. Remember, we had just finished this war. And some of the most pressing issues include the full evacuation of remaining British troops, the British acknowledgement of freedom of the seas. America's trade was severely hampered because British ships kept seizing our ships, so we weren't really free. Well, Jay was a Federalist. And the Federalists were the guys who had a lot of power. They were a lot of business people and everything else, the big businesses of the day. He negotiated something that amounted really to nothing more than appeasement. And the largely outnumbered Federalists were in favor of the deal that he worked up because it would get those big businesses back in business again. But the people, the regular people, were vehemently against it, and they took to the streets en masse to protest. Well, here's what happened. The deal wasn't so much of a deal as it was America taking it on the chin. Here's people who'd given up everything to defeat Great Britain, and then they had to agree to absorb all of the financial losses arising from debts to British merchants to acceptance of the British definition of neutrality at the sea. America yielded on almost every issue. Washington ended up signing the treaty because he said, "Look, we're going to go back to war with Britain. You want to do that again?" It was because of his weight that it barely got ratified. But the American people were not happy. In fact, they were outraged, and mainly not at Washington, but at the big business and all of the special deals that were made. Some people actually called treason at the time. Others called for Washington to be impeached because they viewed it as a product of what happens when a select few of the ruling class ignore the will of the people. And that's what we were supposed to be about. But remember, they did it so we wouldn't go back to war again with England. But by 1812, relations between Britain and the United States had completely fallen apart. It would later become known as the Second War of Independence. They burned down the White House. It was bad. Here's the lesson. All they did by appeasing the British was prolong the inevitable. By refusing to stand on principle and for the best interest of America, they didn't solve anything. In fact, it came down the road and probably was worse because they waited. History's repeating itself, and we can either learn from it and prosper, or we can become another lesson for future generations in possibly a new republic, if it is one, to come.